Thank you for joining me today. My name is Dr. David Ayers, and in this session, we will sit down and talk about PPE body protection. As in all cases, personal protective equipment, PPE, is used as the absolute last line of defense. Do everything you can to engineer out the hazard, eliminate the hazard, maybe even come up with something to reduce the hazard. Do everything you possibly can, because with PPE, a person has to make a conscious decision. So in this episode, we'll kind of just sit down and talk about a couple things on chemical protection. We'll go over the other parts of the body protection of PPE. We obviously think about industrial uses, but there's also your non-industrial uses found in the workplace, such as police and firemen. They have protection on them to help to protect them from the hazards that they have. This episode, again, is brought to you by Applied Safety and Environmental Management and the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast. All right, let's get started. So this episode is part of the PPE Hazard Assessment series here. So once again, your body protection is going to be based on whatever the hazard is that's out there. Chemical, hot, cold, you could be worried about cuts, abrasion, and of course with firefighters, you're worried about, fire, so you're going to wear your turnout coat, and with law enforcement, you're going to end up wearing your body armor and different things depending on what the hazard is. So let's get started here. So here we have a couple of examples. If you look down at your lower left, you have a worker who's putting corrosive material into another little drum of corrosive material. This is the perfect example of how not to wear PPE. If you really have to wear gloves and an apron and wear goggles and things, you should not have your flesh on your arm exposed and everything else. So this is a example of what not to do with PPE. You have to cover up everything, not just the things that happen to be easy and convenient. So when we look at the upper right, we see the firefighters who are putting on their turnout gear then, so it protects them. When we look down at the center, we see the gentleman using a chainsaw. You can see where he has his PPE on too, so he's going to have a lot of potential for cuts, abrasion. Of course, there's flying bits of wood. And in the picture on the upper center, we have a couple of guys who are tackling a train derailment, sampling for chemicals, trying to figure out how far the chemical has leaked and whether that's a gas or some kind of liquid. These guys are set and ready to go. And then finally at the bottom you have police. You can see reasonably well how they do have the plates in for the body armor. But with the police, they do a very good job of trying to cover that up so as not to scare other folks also. Let's go to the next slide here. Talk about HAZWOPER. So this is where there's going to be your different levels of hazard protection, level A through D. And in this, what we're dealing with is specifically if there's a chemical, whether that's liquid or gas leak then. So when you think about your different levels, A, greatest hazard, so it gives you the absolute most protection, and then D is going to be that minimum hazard then, so it gives you the least protection. So the key is that you sat down and assessed the hazard and done everything you can to minimize that hazard. So there's also going to be a couple of different levels, A through C, that integrate the respiratory protection. As part of D, it is not part of respiratory protection. So let's look at level D here first. So we just have a little bit of nuisance contamination and no respiratory protection. But you can still see with the gentleman there, he's got his chemical gear on, he's got his gloves, he's got a face shield, some super awesome glasses underneath there. So he's done everything he can to minimize that hazard. So it would be really awesome if they would go back and automate it. But we do know that in this case, it looks like that liquid is being transferred from a tanker truck into a tote. Some things are extremely hard to automate. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, of course. So this has been a last line of defense here when you can't automate it. Let's go to the next slide here, and we look at level C. Almost the exact same thing as level D, but you can see where they've integrated the respiratory protection. And most of the time, if you're in level C, it doesn't mean that you always need to have a hard hat, of course, because that's all part of your hazard assessment. But there's a reason why that you're going into an area that has these fumes and vapors and everything else that you have to protect your lungs from. Let's go to the next slide here. We look at level B here then. So now we're getting into much tougher protection. So when you think about when something can get on you, it has to have that breakthrough. It has to get through. It just can't automatically get on you. So now when we look at this, we see where the gentleman now has supplied air respiratory protection then. So now on level B, you can see where it's worn on the outside of the suit then. So typically the air tank will last anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. So it might be rated for 30 minutes, but typically when this happens, you're breathing faster, you have reduced vision. Probably there's a little bit of stress and anxiety added in. So 30 minutes does not always mean 30 minutes. Let's go on to the last one here with level A then. So you can see where this is fully encapsulated. So this is really good for going back, because after you do these operations, you have to go back and decontaminate yourself then. And so if it doesn't get on the supplied air breathing apparatus, the SCBA, it's going to be a whole lot easier to go back and clean up and get ready to go then. So with this, it's just like level B, except everything's worn on the inside. It also has a really great viewing surface then for looking at really everything. When you wear the respiratory protection, you have a hard time trying to look left, right, up, and down. So the window really helps out in this fashion then. So let's go on and look, we'll switch gears and we'll look over at arc flash protection then. So as in all things with arc flash protection, you have to go back and look at what level you're going to wear. It is beyond the scope of this presentation to sit down and talk about the calculations and how you figure out the calories per centimeter squared and all that stuff. It's typically done by software when they stick it in the models. But it looks like in this case, what the gentleman is doing some troubleshooting on the different electronic equipment. It is live power, so you always have to go back and figure out exactly what level that you really need for this one. Let's go on to the next slide here. So as we sit down and we break it down, then you're going to have your category 1 through 4 for arc flash protection. As in all things, always try and do no hot work unless you absolutely have to. We do know that there's a couple of older facilities out there where they did not factor all this in when these things were made. It could have been in the 40s, 50s, or 60s. A lot of things from about 1992 on, when the lockout tagout standard happened, they really did a good job of going back and making a way that you can lock out, tag out the power. That doesn't mean that you have to have it on that you don't have to have it on. To go back and do some troubleshooting, kind of figure out exactly what the issue is here. So the categories are broken down here. I'm not going to sit down and cover every single one and just really bore everybody. But then you'll have to go back and look over at your PP, the calories per centimeter squared, and that's how that you're going to, after you've put that into the software, and figure out exactly what category that you're going to have to worry about here. Finally, let's sit down and kind of start to talk about traffic and limited visibility protection then. So it used to be that construction guys on highways were the only ones who really wore these things. Now you're starting to see it a lot more, just kind of pop up in just about everyday places. Some places you're starting to see it as a contract requirement. So if you work on our site, you're a contractor on our site, whatever that issue is, you have to have some form of vest, highly reflective and all that good stuff then, And it's just a really nice way to spot a human. All of us are flawed humans, so anything we can do to help find somebody else, so somebody is not hit, struck, whatever the issue is then. So let's also look at you can see for things like warehouse type things then. When you're using a forklift or other things, it's really difficult to see. So just that little bit more of just, I can see that person, I can take action, I can make sure that somebody is not hurt, really going to help out a lot then in this whole thing of protecting people. So that wraps up this episode. It was just a really quick introduction. Please don't go back and think that you're an expert on PPE body protection. Sit down, do that research, look at the hazards, do everything you can to engineer out the hazards. People are flawed humans, and so anytime we ask them to put on PPE, and whether that's body protection, gloves, that's whatever it is then, we really have to ensure people do it right. And so that's why it's really hard to do this as a flawed human. You're thinking about the weekends, you're just doing other things. So anything that we can do to not torture people with PPE. So once again, I want to thank Applied Safety Management and the Occupational Safety Leadership Podcast for this opportunity. And have a safe day.